What happens aback Britain's beloved morning television host comes face-to-face with an aristocratic who refuses to comedy by the rules. You won't accept what unfolds aback Prince Harry sits bottom-ward with Lorraine Kelly in what bound becomes the best atomic television moment of the year. Behind the cameras of last night's broadcast, tensions accomplished a breaking point that labored admirers stunned and amusing media in complete meltdown. The morning started like any added at the ITV studios with Lorraine Kelly's signature amore bushing the airwaves as she accustomed admirers to her show. The production aggregation had been active with excitement for weeks about securing Prince Harry as a guest. Alive, his appearances consistently generated significant viewership and headlines. What nobody anticipated was that this particular interview would become a masterclass in how bound television gold can turn into an accessible relations nightmare. As the cameras formed and the familiar opening affair faded, Lorraine's professional smile masked what those close to the assembly afterwards described as basil apropos about Harry's recent media strategy. The Duke of Sussex had been authoritative, increasingly controversial statements in various interviews, and there were whispers among the aggregation that today ability be different from his accepted, carefully orchestrated appearances. Good morning and acceptable aback to the show. Lorraine began with her brand Scottish Lil, her eyes ablaze with what appeared to be 18-carat enthusiasm. I'm absolutely delighted to be abutting by Prince Harry, whose actuality to authenticate his latest charitable initiatives and his ongoing work with Brainy Bloom awareness. The studio admirers acclaimed warmly, their energy communicable as Harry acclimatized into the costly account armchair adverse the seasoned presenter. Prince Harry, dressed accidentally in a fleet blazer and open collared shirt, offered a polite smile that didn't absolutely ability his eyes. Those accustomed with his anatomy language might accept noticed the slight restriction in his shoulders. The way his calmly gripped the armrests aloof a atom too tightly. Thank you for accepting me, Lorraine, he replied. His voice carrying that accustomed mix of royal formality in California-influenced casualness that had become his signature tone aback relocating to America. The opening account proceeded smoothly enough with Lorraine expertly navigating through questions about Harry's charitable assignment and his foundation's latest projects. Her interviewing style honed over decades of television experience addled the complete balance between admiring and probing. She had built her career on authoritative guests feel comfortable while still extracting compelling television moments. And initially, it seemed this interview would chase that acknowledged formula. Your assignment with veterans has been particularly abutting to your heart, Lorraine observed, aptitude forward slightly in that affectionate way that made viewers feel like they were eavesdropping on a clandestine conversation. Can you acquaint us about the new initiative you're launching? Harry's response was abstinent and rehearsed, hitting all the accepted talking points about service, sacrifice, and supporting those who had served their country. But beneath the apparent pleasantries, there was an atmosphere of article else brewing. Lorraine, with her journalist's instincts, seemed to faculty that Harry was captivation back, that there were layers to this adventure he wasn't sharing. Her questions began to delving deeper, moving beyond the safe area of charitable work into added claimed reflections on his advancing account and his transition to non-combatant life. You've announced before about the challenges of abrogation military service, she continued. Her tone remaining balmy but acceptable added direct. How do you accommodate your current lifestyle in California with the values you abstruse during your time in the forces? It was a acutely innocent question, but those watching carefully could see Harry's address about face almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened slightly, and there was a beam of something arresting in his eyes. I think that's a rather loaded question, Lorraine. Harry replied, his voice taking on a hardly bluff edge. My commitment to account hasn't changed simply because I've alleged to anatomy a life elsewhere. If anything, I'm able to serve in means that feel added authentic to who I am now. The words were diplomatic enough, but there was an underlying claiming in his emphasis that suggested he wasn't absolutely pleased with the administration the chat was taking. Lorraine, adept broadcaster that she was, accustomed the shift immediately. Years of acquaintance had taught her to apprehend the attenuate signs when an account was about to booty an unexpected turn. Rather than backing down, however, she leaned into the moment with the accomplishment that had fabricated her one of Britain's best trusted television personalities. Of course, nobody's questioning your commitment, she said, Her smile actual in abode alike as her voice took on a hardly firmer quality. But absolutely you can accept why some people ability acquisition it difficult to reconcile your criticism of the British media and the aristocratic academy with your connected use of your aristocratic title in your assorted business ventures. The question afraid in the air like a challenge, and alike the flat audience seemed to faculty that something significant was happening. Harry's response was actual and pointed. I think you're conflating two completely different issues here, he said, his posture straightening as he able for what was acutely activity to be a more confrontational exchange. My appellation is part of who I am, aloof as my commitment to speaking accuracy about harmful institutions is allotment of who I am. I won't apologize for either. The words carried a weight that went aloft their surface meaning, and Lorraine's experienced eye bent the way Harry's media training seemed to be giving way to 18-carat emotion. But surely, you can see how that ability arise contradictory to some people. Lorraine pressed, her tone still professional, but with an edge of animate that her approved viewers recognized as a assurance that she wasn't going to let this go easily. You've made quite austere allegations about how you were treated. Yet, you abide to benefit from the actual arrangement you've criticized so heavily. The temperature in the flat seemed to acceleration several degrees as Harry's anxiously maintained composure began to appearance cracks. His media handlers watching from the wings could be apparent exchanging afraid glances as their admirers' anatomy emphasis became increasingly defensive. What had started as a accepted promotional account was rapidly evolving into article far more volatile, and anybody complex could sense that they were abutting a point of no return. I anticipate you're oversimplifying an actual complex situation, Harry attempted back, his voice rising hardly aloft the conversational tone that had characterized the interview appropriately far. It's accessible to make judgments aback you haven't lived through what I've experienced. The accusation was attenuate but unmistakable, and Lorraine's announcement accustomed almost imperceptibly as she candied the implication that she couldn't possibly understand his position. But what happened abutting would transform this already close barter into something that would boss account for days to come. Lorraine Kelly, her decades of broadcasting acquaintance blame into high gear, abstively to advance alike further into area that Harry's aggregation had clearly hoped to avoid. Her next question cut through the diplomatic dance they had been assuming with surgical precision. Harry, let's talk about article that I anticipate abounding of our viewers are absolutely abashed about, she said, her articulation demography on that deceptively affable emphasis that veteran journalists use aback they're about to deliver an adverse blow. You've repeatedly announced about absent privacy for your family. Yet, you've additionally signed lucrative deals with Netflix and other media companies to allotment intimate details of your clandestine life. How do you square that circle? The catechism landed like an arrow in the studio. Harry's face ablaze visibly, and for a moment, the accurate media training that had guided him through countless interviews seemed to carelessness him entirely. The audience, analysis the shift in atmosphere, fell into an almost complete blackout that fabricated every word Harry added weight. That's a completely arbitrary assuming of what we're doing, Harry responded, his voice now accustomed an apparent edge of anger. We're administration our adventure on our own terms, not accepting it askance and sold by a bloodthirsty media machine. But you are affairs it, aren't you? Lorraine countered afterwards, missing a beat. Her announcer instincts fully engaged now. You're actually selling your privacy, your ancestors' stories, your personal struggles, and you're accomplishing it for millions of pounds while simultaneously accusatory about media intrusion. Surely, you can see why people ability acquisition that hypocritical. Her words were delivered with the affectionate of calm professionalism that fabricated them even more devastating, and Harry's reaction was actual and visceral. You have absolutely no abstraction what you're talking about, Harry snapped, his composure finally arise in a way that sent shock aftereffects through the studio. You sit here in your adequate studio, making judgments about decisions you could never understand, about pressures you've never faced. It's accessible to be sanctimonious aback you've never had your entire activity dissected by tabloids from the moment you were born. The personal attack was unmistakable, and Lorraine's expression confused from professional curiosity to article considerably colder. I may not be royal, Harry, but I've been in this business for over 30 years, Lorraine replied, her Scottish accent acceptable added arresting as her own affections began to surface. I've interviewed bags of people, abounding of whom accept faced far greater challenges than you have, and they've managed to do so with adroitness and address rather than constant complaints about how adamantine their lives are. The admonishment was delivered with devastating precision, and the studio audience collectively captivated its breath. Harry's acknowledgement was abrupt and cutting. "Grace and dignity," he repeated, his voice decrepit with disdain. "Is that what you alarm this ambush? Is this your idea of aristocratic journalism? Bringing me on beneath apocryphal pretenses aloof so you can account bargain credibility with questions designed to accomplish me attending bad?" The accusation frayed in the air like a challenge, and Lorraine's professional mask began to blooper as her own temper started to rise. "Nobody brought you here beneath apocryphal pretenses," she shot back, her articulation assent hardly for the first time in the interview. "You came here to advance your assignment, and I'm asking legitimate questions about the contradictions in your public statements. That's what journalists do, Harry. It's alleged accountability. Something you assume to accept forgotten exists aback you confused to your California mansion." The acrimony in her final words was unmistakable, and Harry's face blurred considerably. "Don't you cartel address me about accountability." Harry accursed back, his voice now loud abundant that the studio microphones best up every syllable with bright clarity. "Where was the accountability aback your industry destroyed my mother? Where was the accountability aback they hounded her to death and again had the adventurousness to profit from her funeral? You appetite to talk about hypocrisy? Attending in the mirror." The abracadabra of Princess Diana sent a arresting shock beachcomber through everyone present and Lorraine's expression accustomed into something approaching anger. "That is completely out of line," Lorraine responded, her voice now accustomed the ascendancy of someone who had been pushed too far. "My industry. I've spent my complete career trying to accompany address and account to broadcasting. Don't you cartel tar me with the aforementioned besom as the tabloids you're so fond of criticizing aback it apparel your purposes." The claimed attributes of the exchange had now accomplished a akin that made anybody in the flat acutely uncomfortable. Harry leaned advanced in his chair, his anatomy emphasis becoming increasingly aggressive. "Oh, please," he said with apparent contempt. "You're all allotment of the aforementioned machine. You pretend to be different, to be better, but aback it comes bottomward to it, you're all agriculture off the aforementioned toxic system. The alone aberration is that you're added affable about it." The insult was delivered with the affectionate of aristocratic antipathy that seemed to come naturally to him, and Lorraine's eyes flashed with 18-carat anger. "How dare you," she said, her articulation now carrying the abounding weight of her professional authority and claimed pride. "I have built my career on alleviative bodies with respect and dignity. I accept never ambushed a guest. I accept never betrayed a confidence. And I accept never profited from anyone's misery. If you can't handle actuality asked basal questions about your own adverse behavior, then perhaps you're not accessible for public life." The admonishment was delivered with devastating effectiveness, and Harry's reaction was actual and explosive. "Not accessible for accessible life," Harry repeated, his articulation now aloft to a level that belted on shouting. "I was born into accessible life. I didn't choose this. It was advance aloft me and I've spent my complete developed activity aggravating to find a way to serve while also protecting my ancestors from the aforementioned fate that befell my mother. If you can't understand that basal animal desire, then you're not the announcer you pretend to be." The claimed advance addled home and Lorraine's able restraint finally began to accord way entirely. The tension in the flat had now accomplished a breaking point that fabricated everyone present acutely acquainted that they were witnessing article unprecedented. Camera operators connected to film, but their expressions showed the affectionate of shock that comes from watching a carefully orchestrated television show spiral absolutely out of control. The audience sat in abashed silence, unsure whether to arbitrate or artlessly bear witness to what was rapidly becoming television history. What neither participant accomplished was that this explosive barter was alone the beginning of what would become the most dramatic avenue in daytime television history. Lorraine Kelly, her face now flushed with 18-carat anger, fabricated a decision that would ascertain her career for years to come. Assent hardly from her chair, She looked anon into Harry's eyes with a affectionate of steely determination that had fabricated her one of Britain's best admired broadcasters. "You apperceive what, Harry?" she said, her voice acid through the restriction like a blade. "I've had abundant of this entitled nonsense. You appear assimilate my show, you insult my profession, you advance my integrity, and again you accept the audacity to comedy the victim aback. I ask you altogether reasonable questions about your own adverse behavior." Harry's response was actual and venomous. "Entitled," he spat, his articulation assent to a akin that fabricated several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "You want to allocution about entitled? You've fabricated a living off the aristocratic ancestors for decades. Every time there's a wedding, a birth, a scandal, there you are commenting, analyzing, profiting, and now you sit there and address me about entitlement." His words agitated the affectionate of aristocratic acerbity that seemed to come from ancestors of breeding, and the effect on Lorraine was electric. "That is absolutely enough," Lorraine declared, her Scottish emphasis now blubbery with emotion. "I accept covered aristocratic events because that's what the British public wants to see. I accept consistently done so with respect and dignity. But I will not sit here and be angered by addition who has spent the aftermost 5 years trashing the very institution that gave him aggregate he has." The certitude in her articulation suggested that the account had accomplished a point of no return. Harry attempted to his anxiety so quickly that his armchair formed backward, the abrupt movement causing a ripple of alarm through the flat crew. "Gave me everything," he shouted, his composure now absolutely abandoned. "That institution amount me my mother. It cost me my brainy health. It amount me any chance of a accustomed life. And now you sit there safe in your little bubble, telling me I should be beholden for the privilege of actuality bolter like an animal by your colleagues in the press." His voice absurd with emotion. But rather than breeding sympathy, it seemed to fuel Lorraine's acrimony alike further. "Your mother would be abashed of what you've become," Lorraine said quietly, her words delivered with surgical precision. The account hit the flat like a physical blow, and the aggregate intake of animation from the admirers was audible even through the flat microphones. Harry's face went white, again red, as the abounding pulse of her words sank in. "How cartel you?" Harry whispered, his voice about audible, but accustomed more menace than any shout. "How cartel you presume to apperceive what my mother would think? You didn't apperceive her. You never met her. You're aloof addition vulture who's congenital a career on her memory." The accusation was devastating. But Lorraine stood her arena with the determination of addition who had assuredly been pushed beyond her breaking point. "I may not have accepted her personally," Lorraine replied, her articulation abiding admitting the emotion crackling through the studio. "But I apperceive she aloft you to have respect for others, to serve your country with address and to put duty before claimed gain. Aggregate you've done a back abrogation. Britain has been the exact adverse of those values." The rebuke was delivered with such conviction that alike Harry seemed momentarily abashed into silence. But the blackout didn't aftermost long. "You sanctimonious, hypocritical," Harry began, his articulation assent to a shout. But Lorraine cut him off with her activity that commanded actual attention. "No," she said firmly, assent from her own chair to face him directly. "You don't get to come assimilate my show, insult aggregate I stand for, advance my profession, and then bandy a acrimony aback you're held accountable for your own words and actions. This account is over." The declaration rang through the flat with absolute finality, and Harry's reaction was actual and explosive. "Fine," Harry shouted, ripping off his microphone with such force that the feedback screeched through the studio speakers. "This is absolutely why I left this backward, biased country in the aboriginal place. You're all the same, petty, jealous, and absolutely incapable of compassionate anyone who dares to think differently." He threw the microphone assimilate his armchair with enough force that it bounced assimilate the floor, the articulate able alveolate through the stunned silence. "Security," Lorraine called out, her articulation accustomed across the flat with able authority. "Please escort the prince off the premises. This appearance has standards, and he acutely doesn't accommodated them." The words were delivered with such algid finality that they seemed to physically stagger Harry, who acutely hadn't accepted such decisive action. "You're throwing me out." Harry asked, his articulation a mixture of atheism and rage. "You're actually throwing a affiliate of the aristocratic family off your affecting little morning show." The incredule in his articulation appropriate that despite all his criticism of royal privilege, he still accepted it to protect him from consequences. "I'm not throwing out a affiliate of the royal family," Lorraine replied coolly, her composure abiding as she reasserted control over her show. "I'm removing a rude, advantaged bedfellow who has shown complete boldness for me, my show, and my audience. Your appellation doesn't accord you the appropriate to behave like a spoiled child." The admonishment was delivered with such adverse calm that it seemed to cut added than any bark as security personnel appeared at the edges of the set. Harry's face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, disbelief, embarrassment, and assuredly a affectionate of desperate defiance. "This is absolutely the kind of analysis that collection us away from this country," he declared, his voice accustomed above the studio. "Small-minded bodies with small-minded attitudes who can't handle anyone who refuses to bow and scrape to their outdated expectations. The alone thing that's anachronous actuality is your behavior," Lorraine attempted back, her articulation ringing with authority. "Now, amuse leave my studio afore you abash yourself any further." The adjournment was absolute, and Harry seemed to apprehend that he had pushed things aloft any achievability of recovery. With one final attending of pure disdain, Harry straightened his jacket and absolved against the flat exit, his movements articulate with about controlled fury. "You'll affliction this," he called over his shoulder, the blackmail carrying clearly through the studio. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Lorraine replied quietly, but her words agitated to every corner of the studio. "It absolutely is." As Harry abolished through the studio doors, followed by security personnel and his own mortified handlers, Lorraine angry aback to face the cameras with able composure that seemed about abnormal given what had aloof transpired. "Well," she said, her articulation abiding to its familiar balmy emphasis as if annihilation had happened. "That was certainly unexpected. Aback we appear aback afterwards the break, we'll be talking to bounded hero Mrs. Henderson about her arm's work with alone cats." The camera lingered on her face for a moment, capturing the slight agitation in her smile that betrayed the affecting assessment of what had aloof occurred afore acid to commercial. In the studio, the audience sat in abashed silence, processing what they had aloof witnessed. The aggregation began the convenience accepted of resetting for the abutting segment, but their movements were mechanical, their minds clearly still addled from the extraordinary confrontation they had aloof filmed. As the actual shock began to abrasion off, one affair became bright clear to everyone present. They had just witnessed television history in the making. A moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years to come. Lorraine Kelly had done article that many had anticipation impossible. She had held a affiliate of the aristocratic family accountable for his behavior and refused to be abashed by his cachet or his tantrums. The account was over, but its pulse was aloof begin.